weeks ago, and the message was, there is no life movement without life. That God's raising up a generation that is not only speaking against abortion, but we're living out what the revelation of what it means to be the sons and daughters of the living God, that we are alive, that we're adopted by a living Father, that we're alive. Just say, I'm alive. I'm alive. You're alive. 32 years ago, I was put up for adoption by a young lady. I was actually the product. I can't go into the story too much. I was actually the product of evangelism gone bad. My mom got saved, and she decided to evangelize this guy. And, well, basically, he evangelized her like into the bed, you know what I mean? And then, you know, I was the product of it or whatever, you know what I mean? And, anyway, he wasn't a believer, and she was a new Christian. And there's all kinds of people trying to coerce her to abort me. And inside of her, she felt like there was legitimacy in who I was as a child. And so as this messed up young little girl, she prays this prayer over me as a little boy, and she puts me up for adoption. And at the top of the page, she writes this letter of prayers over me. And she puts this letter, she gives it to Lutheran Social Services and sends me down the stream of adoption. But she wrote this letter of prayers over me that's handwritten, that she would never see again, because when I was adopted, it was all closed adoption. So she could never open up the file. I could only open up the file. So she writes this handwritten letter, and she, as this kind of messed up little girl that just has a little bit of faith, she just starts praying these prayers over my life. She prays, one thing I ask of the Lord, that will I seek, that I will dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, and that I will see you there, Jade. I will see you there, son. She didn't know my name. I will see you there. She wrote wisdom and Proverbs and Psalms. At the top of the page, she wrote Genesis. There's the passage where Laban is speaking to Jacob. She wrote, and God will keep covenant between me and you while we are away from each other. So I just decided a few weeks ago, out of the blue, to just tell Lutheran Social Services to open the file. Maybe I could meet her, you know. So she lives in Minneapolis. I find out she's a believer. This is the wildest story. It's a long story, so I'm just trying to tell you to it short. It's a little bit detailed. But so I call them up, and the first thing I get is they open the file and they send me that letter. And all of a sudden I realize that this young messed up girl prayed one prayer out of faith and wrote a letter. And in that letter that was locked in a file that only I could open, 32 years later, I open that file and I read the letter that my biological mother, messed up as she was at that time, had the faith enough to put me up for adoption and believe that God would finish the work that He started in me, and that I had purpose, that I was legitimate. She prays these prayers over me, and every prayer that she prayed came to pass and more. That I would be a worshiper, that I would seek the face of God, that as a young man I'd be filled with the wisdom of heaven. She prayed all these things over me 32 years ago, and God heard her prayer. I remember when I was 13 years old, it wasn't because of anything in myself. I remember when I was 13 years old, my mom and dad that adopted me, they're such sweet people, they said, you know, what would you like for your birthday gift this year? I said, Dad, I want a Bible. When I was 13. This wasn't because of something in me, it was because of the prayer of this mother. God answers every prayer. This is the wild thing. So we finally connect, and Lutheran Social Services people, they connect with my mother. And they said, you know, Jason's really interested in this being the right time for you. And he was wondering, are you a believer? She said, yeah, I'm a believer. By the time I connected with her, I found out that she goes to a spirit-filled church, and she's been in the prayer rooms listening to my music for the last 7 years. God, help us not to be trapped in what we think and what man thinks. Man tries to say this is what's legitimate and this is what's not. But God takes everything and He makes it legitimate. He makes it new, and He makes it beautiful in His time. Raise your hands to heaven. Let me just say this over you. You're free. When the sun set free, it's free indeed. 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 When the sun set free. I have to be sensitive about how I say this. But listen to this. I have to be sensitive about how I say this. But my mother, when she was 16, was impregnated. And a very influential person who had lots of money took her to New York. This probably was 1969, 1970. And gave her the money and the finances to have an abortion. And when she got out of the abortion clinic, she walks out and this very influential person said, now you're free. You can be everything you want to be. It's all going to be okay. Now you're free. And she said to me, but I didn't feel free, Jason. She wasn't even a believer yet. Then the Jesus movement sweeps through, you know. She gets completely saved. And then she gets a part of this, you know, she's still a hurting, broken girl. She gets a part of this movement of people, you know, and they say, oh, let's go evangelize, you know. So she goes to these places, and there's this young, handsome philosopher. And they start going to try to save this group of philosophers, and she ends up falling for this guy, you know. And that was my father. And so I come along. And this person comes back and says, we can do it again. It's okay, we can do it again. We can go to that place and you can get rid of this child and you'll be free. And she said, I can't do that. So she started working a job in a factory. She kept me for 2.5 months. She named me Stephen. She kept me for 2.5 months and just like held on to me and tried her best. And she realized that I needed a home where I would have a father and a mother. So she sent me out for adoption. When I heard that, I started weeping because I realized, man, she doesn't even know, but the very first song that I ever released on the Key of David record, the very first lyric I ever sang, without ever knowing this, I said, freedom! Very very first line I ever sang at 6 o'clock in the morning in Washington, D.C., the year of the call. Freedom! That a young girl who is in the midst of sin and bondage has the hope to say, that is not what's really going to make me free. I have freedom in my belly. And this young boy is going, she didn't even know, she didn't have any understanding. I had no understanding. But the Lord had all the understanding. And beyond your understanding, you are free. Beyond your understanding, you are free. Beyond your ability to even see it, you are free. Because whom the Son set free is free indeed.